The billionaire's 12-year-old son was failing every test at school until the 7-year-old maid's daughter revealed a secret that would change everything. When a billionaire's failing son meets a housekeeper's brilliant daughter, their worlds collide in the most unexpected way. One secret will change everything. Like and comment if you believe in unlikely heroes. The mahogany doors of the Blackwood Academy headmaster's office closed with a finality that echoed through Richard Blackwood's chest like a death knell. His 12-year-old son, Michael, sat slouched in the leather chair beside him, staring at his shoes with the defeated posture of a boy who had heard this conversation too many times before. The autumn light filtering through the tall windows cast long shadows across the Persian rug, highlighting the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny witnesses to another academic disaster. "Mr. Blackwood," Headmaster Williams began, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority, "I'm afraid we've reached a point where we must seriously consider Michael's future at this academy. His performance in mathematics, science, and literature has not merely plateaued, it has declined precipitously. Despite our best efforts, despite the additional tutoring, despite the modified curriculum we've implemented specifically for him, Michael continues to score in the bottom percentile of his class." Richard felt his jaw tighten. The Blackwood name had graced the halls of this prestigious institution for 3 generations. His grandfather had donated the library wing, his father had endowed a scholarship fund, and now his son was about to become the first Blackwood to be asked to leave. The irony wasn't lost on him that the boy who would inherit a technology empire worth $12 billion couldn't pass a 7th-grade math test. "There must be something we can do," Richard said, his voice carefully controlled. "Additional resources, perhaps a different approach." "We've exhausted our options within the traditional framework," Williams interrupted gently. "Michael's teachers report that he seems intelligent enough during discussions, but when it comes to demonstrating that intelligence through examinations or written work, something simply isn't connecting. It's as if there's a barrier we cannot breach." Michael finally looked up, his blue eyes so much like his mother's, filled with a mixture of shame and resignation that made Richard's heart clench. The boy had inherited the Blackwood height and strong jaw, but where Richard possessed an innate confidence that had driven him to expand his father's business into a tech empire, Michael seemed to shrink inward whenever faced with academic pressure. "I try, Dad," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible. "I really do try. But when I look at the test questions, it's like my brain just stops, like there's static covering everything I thought I knew." The drive home to their Fifth Avenue penthouse was conducted in tense silence. Richard's mind raced through possibilities: private tutors, educational specialists, even the possibility of homeschooling. As their black Bentley pulled into the underground parking garage of their building, he made a decision that would change everything, though he couldn't know it at the time. "We'll figure this out, Michael," he said, placing a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "Blackwoods don't give up. We'll find someone who can unlock whatever's blocking you, and we'll turn this around." But as they rode the private elevator to the 42nd floor, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The quarterly board meeting was approaching, where he would face questions about succession planning. How could he name an heir who might not even graduate middle school? The penthouse felt unusually quiet when they entered. Generally, the sound of conversation drifted from the kitchen area, where Maria Santos, their housekeeper of 7 years, would be preparing dinner while her daughter Emma worked on homework at the Granite Island. But today, only Maria emerged from the kitchen, her expression carefully neutral as she took their coats. "Mrs. Blackwood called," Maria said in her soft accent. "She'll be late returning from the charity committee meeting. Dinner will be ready at 7. Richard nodded, loosening his tie as he headed toward his study. The walls were lined with awards and photographs, documenting the growth of Blackwood Technologies, from his father's small computer repair shop to the current multinational corporation. Each image seemed to mock him now. What good was building an empire if your only heir couldn't pass a basic math test? Michael trudged toward his room, but paused when he noticed Emma's small form hunched over a thick textbook at the kitchen island. At 7 years old, she was petite even for her age, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wearing a second-hand dress that Maria had carefully mended. She was so quiet and unobtrusive that the family often forgot she was there, a living shadow who moved through their world without disturbing its rhythm. But something about her intense concentration caught Michael's attention. He'd seen that same focused expression on his father's face during important business calls, but never on a child, and certainly never on himself when approaching schoolwork. "What are you working on?" he asked, moving closer to peer over her shoulder. Emma startled, quickly closing the book and sliding it beneath a pile of what appeared to be elementary-level worksheets. "Just homework," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. Michael frowned. He'd glimpsed enough of the page to know that the equations she'd been studying were far more complex than anything a 7-year-old should be encountering. The symbols and formulas looked more like the advanced calculus his father had mentioned studying in college. "That didn't look like first-grade math," he said carefully. Emma's dark eyes flicked up to meet his, and for just a moment, Michael saw something that reminded him of his father during particularly challenging business negotiations, a sharp intelligence that seemed far older than her years. Then it was gone, replaced by the shy, almost invisible demeanor she typically displayed. "I was just looking at pictures," she said quietly. "I like the patterns." Before Michael could respond, Maria appeared at his elbow. "Emma, help me set the table," she said firmly, and her daughter immediately slid off the stool and moved toward the dining room. But as Michael watched the small girl carefully arrange the silver and crystal with practiced precision, he couldn't shake the image of those complex equations or the brief glimpse of something extraordinary hiding behind Emma's carefully constructed invisibility. That night, after a tense dinner where his mother, Victoria, tried to maintain cheerful conversation while avoiding the obvious topic of the day's school meeting, Michael lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. Through his bedroom window, the lights of Manhattan glittered like fallen stars, each one representing someone else's success, someone else's potential being realized. He thought about Emma, bent over that textbook with an intensity he'd never managed to summon for his own studies. There was something there, something important, but he couldn't quite grasp what it meant. As sleep finally began to claim him, Michael made a decision that would set in motion a chain of events none of them could anticipate. Tomorrow, he would find out what Emma Santos was really studying in that kitchen. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made Manhattan feel alive with possibility. Michael had barely slept, his mind churning over the image of Emma hunched over that complex textbook. He dressed quickly in his school uniform, navy blazer, grey slacks, and the crimson tie that marked him as a Blackwood Academy student. But instead of heading directly to breakfast, he detoured through the kitchen. Emma sat at the island again, but this time she was genuinely working on first-grade material, simple addition problems written in large, childish numbers. When she saw Michael approaching, she smiled shyly and pointed to a problem she'd just completed. "I did 27 plus 14, she said proudly. 41. Michael sat on the stool beside her, studying her work. The addition was correct, but the handwriting showed the careful, deliberate strokes of someone much older than 7 trying to disguise their natural penmanship. He'd seen enough of his own attempts at faking homework to recognize the signs. "That's really good," he said carefully. "Emma, can I ask you something?" She nodded, but her shoulders tensed slightly. "Yesterday, when I saw you with that other book, the one with the complicated math, where did you get it?" Emma's crayon stilled on the paper. For a long moment she didn't respond, and Michael could almost see her mind working, weighing options. "I found it," she said finally. "In the library downstairs. Someone left it behind." The Blackwood building had a small residence library on the 15th floor, filled with books that tenants had donated over the years. It was possible that a college textbook had ended up there, but Michael sensed there was more to the story. "Could you show me?" he asked. "The book, I mean. I'm having trouble with math at school, and maybe looking at it would help." Emma's eyes widened with something that might have been panic. It's really hard. You probably wouldn't understand it." The words stung, particularly because they echoed what Michael had been telling himself for months. But there was something in Emma's tone that wasn't condescending. It was protective, as if she was trying to shield him from something rather than insult him. "Try me," he said quietly. After a moment's hesitation, Emma slid off her stool and moved to the small cabinet where her mother stored cleaning supplies. From behind a stack of dish towels, she pulled out not one but 3 thick textbooks: Advanced Calculus and Analytical Geometry, Principles of Quantum Mechanics, and Introduction to Computational Mathematics. Michael stared at the books, then at Emma, then back at the books. These weren't textbooks that had been abandoned in a community library. They were current editions, expensive, and filled with handwritten notes in the margins. Notes written in the same careful script he'd just seen Emma use on her addition problems. "Emma," he said slowly, "these are graduate-level textbooks. Where did you really get them?" For the first time since he'd known her, Emma's carefully maintained composure cracked. Her lower lip trembled, and she wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to become even smaller than she already was. "You can't tell anyone," she whispered. "Please, if people find out, they'll make Mama leave and we have nowhere else to go." Michael felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Find out what?" "That I'm not normal," Emma said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "That I've been reading since I was 3, and I finished all the elementary and middle school math books at the public library before we moved here. I try to act like other kids, but I can't help thinking about the patterns and the numbers, and sometimes I solve problems, just to see if I can." She moved to the quantum mechanics textbook and opened it to a page covered in equations. In the margins, written in tiny, precise handwriting, were what appeared to be corrections to the published formulas, along with alternative solutions that took up less space and fewer steps. "You've been correcting college textbooks?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some of them have mistakes," Emma said defensively, "or they make things more complicated than they need to be. Math should be elegant, not messy." Michael stared at the 7-year-old girl who had just casually mentioned correcting quantum mechanics equations for elegance. His own struggles with basic algebra suddenly seemed not just embarrassing but almost absurd. "How long have you been able to do this?" "Always," Emma said simply. "Numbers and patterns just make sense to me the way English makes sense to you. But Mama says I can't let anyone know because if I'm too different, people won't want us around." The weight of her words settled over Michael like a heavy blanket. Here was a child who could solve problems that would challenge graduate students, forced to hide her intelligence and pretend to struggle with first-grade addition. Meanwhile, he, with every advantage money could buy, couldn't pass a 7th-grade exam. "Emma," he said carefully, "what if I told you I could help you? What if you didn't have to hide anymore?" Her dark eyes searched his face, looking for deception or mockery. "How?" "I don't know yet," Michael admitted, "but there has to be a way. Someone with your abilities shouldn't have to pretend to be ordinary. And what about you?" Emma asked quietly. "What if I could help you with your school problems? Would you want that?" Michael considered the offer. His pride rebelled against accepting help from a 7-year-old, but his desperation was stronger than his ego. "What did you have in mind?" Emma pulled out a sheet of paper and quickly wrote down a series of algebraic equations, problems that looked similar to the ones that had stumped him on his last math test. Then, in the margin, she began breaking down the solution process into simple, logical steps. "Math isn't about memorizing formulas," she said, her voice taking on a confidence he'd never heard from her before. "It's about seeing the relationships between things. Look, this equation wants to tell you something. You just have to listen to what it's saying." As Emma explained her approach, something clicked in Michael's mind that had never clicked before. The numbers stopped looking like arbitrary symbols and started forming patterns he could follow. For the first time in months, math began to make sense. But even as excitement built in his chest, Michael realized they were standing at the edge of something much more complicated than tutoring. Emma's gift was extraordinary, but it was also dangerous, not because of what she could do, but because of how others might react to it. At that moment, Maria's voice called from the hallway. "Emma, time to get ready for school. Michael, your car will be here in 10 minutes. Emma quickly gathered the textbooks, preparing to hide them again, but Michael caught her arm gently. "Leave them out," he said. "I want to try some of those problems after school." "But if your parents see—" "Let me worry about my parents," Michael said with more confidence than he felt. "Maybe it's time both of us stopped pretending to be something we're not." As they parted ways for their respective schools, Neither child could have imagined that their conversation had been overheard by someone who recognized the implications of what Emma had revealed, and who had very specific plans for how such an extraordinary mind might be utilized. Doctor. Jennifer Hartwell had been standing in the hallway outside the kitchen for the past 10 minutes, ostensibly reviewing her notes for the morning's educational assessment, but actually listening to every word of the conversation between Michael and Emma. As the Blackwoods' newly hired private educational consultant, a woman with credentials from Harvard and MIT who specialized in learning disabilities among gifted children, she had arrived early for her first session with Michael. What she had heard changed everything. Jennifer had built her career on identifying and nurturing exceptional minds, and she had developed an almost supernatural ability to recognize true genius when she encountered it. The child in the kitchen wasn't just bright or precocious, she was operating at a level that Jennifer had only seen twice before in her 20-year career. As Emma's small form disappeared toward the service elevator that would take her to the building's childcare center, and Michael headed to his own school, Jennifer made a decision that would alter the trajectory of multiple lives. She knocked firmly on the kitchen door. "Mrs. Santos," she called. "I'm Dr. Hartwell, here to work with Michael. Could I speak with you for a moment?" Maria appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression immediately guarded. Jennifer had seen that look before, the protective wariness of someone who had learned that attention from authority figures rarely brought good news. "Of course, Dr. Hartwell, Mr. Blackwood mentioned you would be coming. Can I get you coffee?" "That would be lovely, thank you." Jennifer settled onto one of the island stools, noting the textbooks that Michael had convinced Emma to leave visible. She waited until Maria had prepared the coffee and was standing across from her before speaking again. "Mrs. Santos, I couldn't help but notice that Emma has some rather advanced reading material for a 7-year-old. Maria's hands stilled on the coffee cup. "Those aren't hers. She was just looking at the pictures." "I see," Jennifer said gently. "And the marginal notes correcting the quantum mechanics formulas? Also just pictures?" The color drained from Maria's face. For a moment, Jennifer thought the woman might deny everything, but then Maria's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Please," Maria whispered, "please don't tell them. Emma's just different. But she's a good girl, and I keep her out of the way. She won't cause any trouble." Jennifer leaned forward, her voice warm but serious. "Mrs. Santos, I think you misunderstand why I'm asking. Your daughter isn't in trouble. She's extraordinary. What I overheard this morning suggests that Emma may be one of the most intellectually gifted children I've ever encountered." "That's not possible," Maria said quickly. "She's just 7 years old." "Age has nothing to do with intellectual capacity," Jennifer replied. "Some of the greatest mathematical minds in history showed similar abilities in early childhood. Ramanujan was solving advanced problems before he was 10. Pascal invented mechanical calculators as a teenager. And from what I just witnessed, Emma may be operating at that level." Maria stared at her, confusion and fear warring in her expression. "I don't understand. What does this mean?" "It means," Jennifer said carefully, "that Emma needs specialized education designed for her abilities. It means she deserves opportunities that can nurture her gifts instead of forcing her to hide them. And it means that she might be exactly what Michael needs to overcome his learning challenges." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Richard Blackwood's voice in the hallway. He entered the kitchen moments later, dressed for business and checking his phone for messages. "Dr. Hartwell," he said, looking up with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I trust Maria has taken care of you. I'm hoping you can work miracles with Michael. His mother and I are at our wits' end." Jennifer studied Richard's face, seeing the weight of expectation and disappointment that had accumulated over months of failed attempts to help his son. She made a calculated decision. "Mr. Blackwood, I'd like to propose something unconventional. Based on my preliminary observations, I believe Michael's learning difficulties may not be the result of lack of ability, but rather an issue with how information is being presented to him. Some children need different approaches, more visual, more interactive, more connected to real-world applications." "We've tried different approaches," Richard said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Multiple tutors, learning specialists, even experimental programs. Nothing seems to work. What if I told you, Jennifer said slowly, that the solution might already be in your home? Richard frowned. What do you mean? Jennifer glanced at Maria, who stood frozen by the coffee maker, then back at Richard. I mean that sometimes the most effective learning happens between peers. Children often connect with explanations from other children in ways they can't with adult instruction. You're suggesting we find other children to tutor Michael? I'm suggesting, Jennifer said, that we consider the possibility that the perfect tutor might already be living under your roof. Richard looked genuinely confused. I'm not following. Emma Santos, Jennifer said clearly, appears to have an exceptional aptitude for mathematics. This morning, I observed her working through problems that most college students would find challenging. More importantly, I saw her explain concepts to Michael in a way that immediately made sense to him. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stared at Jennifer as if she had suggested that their goldfish could teach calculus. Emma is 7 years old, he said finally. Age is irrelevant when discussing intellectual capacity, Jennifer replied. What matters is her ability to understand complex concepts and communicate them effectively. From what I observed, she excels at both. Maria stepped forward, her voice trembling. Doctor Hartwell, with respect, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Emma is just a normal little girl who— Mrs. Santos, Jennifer interrupted gently. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know exceptional ability when I see it. The question isn't whether Emma is gifted. The question is whether we're going to help her reach her potential while simultaneously helping Michael with his challenges. Richard looked between the two women, then at the textbooks still lying on the counter. Are you seriously suggesting that my housekeeper's 7-year-old daughter could tutor my son? I'm suggesting, Jennifer said, that we test the hypothesis. Give me 1 week working with both children together. If I'm wrong, you've lost nothing. If I'm right, you may have found the solution to both children's problems. Richard was quiet for a long moment, and Jennifer could almost see him weighing the absurdity of the suggestion against his desperation to help his son. Finally, he looked at Maria. What do you think, Mrs. Santos? Would Emma be comfortable working with Michael? Maria's eyes filled with tears. I think, she said quietly, that Emma would be happy to help anyone who needed it. But I also think you don't understand what you're asking. Then help me understand, Richard said. Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. If Emma really is as smart as Dr. Hartwell says, then she's been hiding it her whole life because smart little girls from poor families don't get opportunities. They get taken away from their mothers and put in programs where they become experiments instead of children. The weight of her words settled over the kitchen like a physical presence. Jennifer realized that Maria's fear wasn't unfounded. In her professional experience, she had seen exceptional children removed from their families and placed in institutional programs that prioritized research over well-being. That won't happen here, Richard said firmly. Emma would remain with you in your home as part of our family. But she would also have access to educational resources that could nurture her abilities. And Michael, Maria asked, what happens if Emma can help him? But then you don't need us anymore. Jennifer watched Richard's face as he processed the implications of the question. This wasn't just about tutoring, it was about trust, security, and the complex dynamics of class and privilege that none of them could ignore. Mrs. Santos, Richard said finally, if your daughter can help my son succeed, then you and Emma will have a place in this family for as long as you want it. That's not a business arrangement, that's a promise. As the 3 adults stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of Emma's hidden genius, none of them could have predicted that their conversation was being recorded by someone who had very different plans for the little girl's extraordinary mind. 3 weeks later, the transformation in the Blackwood penthouse was gradual but unmistakable. What had once been a battleground of academic frustration was slowly becoming something resembling hope. Michael sat at the kitchen island across from Emma, both children surrounded by a carefully organized array of textbooks, notebooks, and what appeared to be mathematical problems that progressed from simple to increasingly complex. Okay, Emma said, her voice carrying a growing confidence. Remember what we learned about how equations tell stories? This one is asking us about the relationship between two numbers. Michael nodded, his concentration more sustained than his parents had seen in months. Over the past 3 weeks, Dr. Hartwell had been observing their sessions with cautious optimism. The improvement wasn't dramatic. Michael's practice test scores had increased by about 15%, but more importantly, his attitude toward learning was fundamentally changing. "So, if I have this equation," Michael said, pointing to a problem Dr. Hartwell had given him, "I need to figure out what story the numbers are telling me." "Exactly." Emma's face lit up with genuine excitement. "And look, do you see how this problem uses the same kind of thinking as yesterday's problem? It's like the numbers are speaking the same language, just about different things." Victoria Blackwood paused in the kitchen doorway, watching her son engage with learning in a way that, while not miraculous, was certainly more positive than anything she'd seen before. Over the past few weeks, she had begun to understand that this arrangement was about more than just academic improvement. "Good morning, you two," she said, moving to the coffee maker. "How are the studies progressing?" "Mom, look at this," Michael said, pointing to a completed worksheet. "Emma helped me understand why these problems work the way they do. I'm starting to see patterns I never noticed before." Victoria smiled, though she still felt uncertain about the unconventional nature of their arrangement. Her son was being helped by their housekeeper's 7-year-old daughter, and while it seemed to be working, the situation raised questions she wasn't entirely sure how to address. "That's wonderful, darling," she said carefully. "Emma, you're being very helpful to Michael." Emma ducked her head shyly, but Victoria caught a glimpse of the quiet intelligence that Dr. Hartwell had identified. The child was clearly bright, but Victoria was still processing the full implications of just how bright she might be. Dr. G. Hartwell entered the kitchen, carrying her assessment materials and a tablet loaded with educational software. Over the past 3 weeks, she had been conducting careful evaluations of both children, and her findings were both encouraging and concerning. "Good morning, everyone," she said. "Michael, are you ready for today's practice test?" "Actually," Michael said, glancing at Emma, "could we review a few problems together first? Emma has this way of explaining things that helps me understand the underlying concepts." Jennifer nodded, but her expression was thoughtful. "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss with all of you. Could we gather in the living room? I think it's time we talked about some important developments." 10 minutes later, the family was assembled in the main living room, Richard and Victoria on the leather sofa, Michael in the window seat, and Maria and Emma sitting together on the smaller couch. The physical arrangement unconsciously reflected the social dynamics that Jennifer was about to address. "First," Jennifer began, "I want to share the results of these past 3 weeks. Michael, your improvement has been steady and meaningful. Your test scores have improved by 15%, but more importantly, your approach to learning has become much more confident and systematic." Richard felt a cautious sense of relief. "That's encouraging news." "It is," Jennifer agreed. "But we need to understand what's making this progress possible." She turned to Emma, who was sitting quietly beside her mother. "Emma, would you be comfortable sharing with everyone what we discovered during your assessments?" Emma looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly, though Maria's expression remained guarded. "Dr. Hartwell gave me some tests," Emma said quietly. "Math tests and reading tests and thinking puzzles. What Emma isn't mentioning," Jennifer said carefully, "is that she demonstrated abilities that are quite remarkable for someone her age. Her mathematical reasoning is advanced, probably equivalent to someone in high school. Her reading comprehension is similarly developed. And her ability to see patterns and solve complex problems is exceptional." The silence that followed was thoughtful rather than shocked. Victoria had begun to suspect that Emma was unusually bright, but hearing it confirmed professionally was still surprising. "What does this mean for her future?" Victoria asked quietly. "That's exactly what we need to discuss," Jennifer replied. "Because Emma's situation is delicate. Exceptionally gifted children from economically disadvantaged backgrounds often face challenges that wealthy families don't typically encounter." Maria's hand found Emma's. "What kind of challenges?" Jennifer's expression grew serious. "There are people and institutions that view children like Emma as opportunities rather than individuals. They promise extraordinary educational resources, but sometimes what they really want is to study exceptional children or use their abilities for purposes that aren't in the child's best interests. That won't happen here, Richard said firmly, though he was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. I believe that, Jennifer said, which is why I want to recommend a careful approach. Emma should receive educational opportunities that match her abilities, but she should also maintain the family stability and normal childhood experiences that are crucial for healthy development. What would that look like practically? Victoria asked. A gradual expansion of Emma's educational opportunities while she continues living with her family. Specialized tutoring in areas where she shows particular strength, continued collaboration with Michael, and careful monitoring to ensure she remains emotionally healthy and socially connected. Emma spoke up suddenly, her voice small but clear. What if people find out about me? What if they want to take me away from Mama? The question revealed the fear that had been underlying much of the family's caution. Jennifer knelt down until she was at eye level with Emma. Emma, that's exactly why we're being so careful about this. The people who truly care about gifted children understand that keeping families together is usually what's best for the child. But not everyone feels that way? Emma asked with the perceptiveness that characterized her thinking. No, Jennifer admitted, not everyone does. Which is why it's important that we're thoughtful about how we handle your education and who we involve in it. Richard stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. When he turned back, his expression was resolute but cautious. We'll proceed carefully, he said. Emma's well-being comes first. That includes her intellectual development and her family relationships. But I want both of you to know that this family's resources are available to ensure Emma has appropriate opportunities. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Blackwood, we're grateful, but we also need to be realistic about what this means. What do you mean? Victoria asked gently. I mean that when children like Emma are identified as exceptional, sometimes it attracts attention from people who have their own agendas, Maria said quietly. People who see opportunity where we see a little girl who needs protection. As the family discussed the careful balance between nurturing Emma's gifts and protecting her childhood, none of them noticed the small surveillance device that had been discreetly placed behind one of the decorative plants near the window 3 days earlier. And none of them could have imagined that their conversation was being monitored by someone who had spent weeks positioning himself to learn about exceptional children in wealthy households. 2 miles away, in a modest office near Columbia University, Dr. Marcus Webb reviewed the audio files he had been collecting. As a researcher whose funding had been cut due to questions about his methodology, he had become increasingly desperate to find subjects for his cognitive development studies. The Santos child represented exactly the kind of exceptional subject that could restore his academic reputation and secure new funding. The Blackwood family's wealth and caution would make acquiring access to Emma more complex than his previous acquisitions, but Dr. Webb had handled similar situations before. The key was to present himself as offering opportunities rather than threats, to gain the family's trust before revealing his true intentions. Dr. Webb smiled as he began preparing the materials that would soon allow him to make contact with the Blackwood family. They had no idea that their careful protection of Emma had actually been observed and analyzed, or that their efforts to keep her safe had inadvertently provided him with detailed information about her abilities and vulnerabilities. 6 weeks after Emma's abilities had been officially recognized, the Blackwood family had settled into a new routine that balanced her intellectual development with normal childhood experiences. Emma was working with a specialized tutor 3 mornings a week, while continuing to help Michael with his studies in the afternoons. The arrangement was working well, but on this particular Thursday morning everything changed. Emma was reviewing advanced algebra problems when the building's concierge called to announce that Dr. Marcus Webb from the Institute for Advanced Childhood Development was in the lobby, requesting to speak with the Blackwood family about educational opportunities for exceptional children. The name meant nothing to Emma, but she noticed that Dr. Hartwell's face went pale when the concierge mentioned it. "Tell him we're not available, Doctor," Hartwell said quickly, but Richard had already instructed the concierge to send Dr. Webb up. "Who is Dr. Webb?" Richard asked, noting Jennifer's obvious concern. "He's—" Jennifer paused, choosing her words carefully. "Marcus Webb runs a private research institute. He has a reputation in our field, but not necessarily a positive one." "What kind of reputation?" Victoria asked. "He specializes in studying exceptionally gifted children, but his methods and motivations have been questioned by other professionals. He tends to prioritize research over the well-being of the children involved." Before anyone could respond, the elevator chimed, and Dr. Webb appeared in their foyer. He was a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of authoritative presence that commanded attention. He carried a leather briefcase and wore an expensive suit that suggested success and respectability. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood," Dr. Webb said with practiced charm, "thank you for agreeing to see me. I'm Dr. Marcus Webb, and I understand you have a remarkably gifted child in your household." "I'm not sure what you're referring to," Richard said carefully. Dr. Webb smiled. "Perhaps I should be more direct. I specialize in identifying and working with children who demonstrate exceptional intellectual capacity. Word travels quickly in our community when such a child is discovered." "How exactly did you hear about Emma?" Dr. Hartwell asked, her tone professional but wary. "The community of educators who work with gifted children is relatively small," Dr. Webb replied smoothly. "When a child demonstrates abilities like Emma's, it naturally generates discussion among those of us who specialize in such cases." Emma, who had been listening quietly, felt something uncomfortable about Dr. Webb's manner. There was something in his tone that reminded her of the way some adults talked about valuable objects they wanted to acquire. "What kind of services do you provide?" Victoria asked. "My institute offers comprehensive programs for exceptionally gifted children," Dr. Webb said, opening his briefcase and removing several glossy brochures. "We provide educational resources that go far beyond what traditional schools or even private tutoring can offer." Maria stepped closer to Emma, her maternal instincts responding to something in Dr. Webb's presentation that felt threatening rather than helpful. "Emma is receiving excellent educational support," Maria said firmly. Dr. Webb's attention shifted to Maria, and his expression became condescending. "Mrs. Santos, I understand your attachment to your daughter, but you must recognize that Emma's intellectual gifts require specialized resources that are difficult to provide in a home environment. What exactly are you proposing?" Richard asked, his voice taking on the edge that appeared whenever he sensed a business threat. "I'm proposing that Emma participate in our residential program," Dr. Webb said. "She would live at our institute during the week, receiving intensive educational support, specifically designed for children of her exceptional capacity." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Maria gasped and moved protectively in front of Emma, while Victoria instinctively stepped closer to the Santos family. "You want to take her away from her family?" Victoria asked, incredulous. "I want to provide her with opportunities that match her extraordinary potential," Dr. Webb replied smoothly. "Emma is intellectually gifted in ways that occur perhaps once in a generation. It would be tragic to allow such potential to be limited by conventional family arrangements." Dr. Hartwell stepped forward, her professional composure barely containing her anger. "Marcus, what you're suggesting is completely inappropriate. Emma is thriving in her current environment." "Jennifer," Dr. Webb replied coolly, "you of all people should understand the responsibility we bear when we encounter a mind like Emma's. She could contribute significantly to our understanding of human cognitive development. That potential shouldn't be constrained by sentimental attachments." Emma had been listening to the conversation with growing alarm, but now something else began to emerge, a clarity of thought that surprised even her. She looked up at Dr. Webb and spoke in a voice that was calm but firm. "Dr. Webb," she said clearly, "I think you're making some incorrect assumptions." The room fell silent. "Dr." Webb looked down at Emma with interest, clearly pleased to interact directly with the subject of his visit. "What assumptions might those be, Emma?" "You're assuming that being smart means I should be separated from my family," Emma said. "But research shows that gifted children do better when they have emotional support and stable relationships." Dr. Webb's eyebrows rose. You've been reading research about gifted children. Dr. Hartwell has been teaching me about how exceptional children learn best, Emma said. She explained that being intellectually advanced doesn't mean I should be treated like an experiment. And what else has Dr. Hartwell taught you? Dr. Webb asked, his tone suggesting he was evaluating Emma's responses. Emma looked around the room at the faces of the people who had become her family, then back at Dr. Webb. She taught me that people who really care about gifted children want what's best for the whole child, not just their intellectual abilities. She paused, then continued with a directness that surprised the adults. She also told me about researchers who sometimes care more about studying exceptional children than about helping them be happy and healthy. Dr. Webb's confident expression began to falter. I see you've been given a particular perspective on educational research. I've been given honest information, Emma replied simply. Dr. Hartwell explained that there are people who might want to use my abilities for their own purposes, instead of helping me develop them in a healthy way. Richard stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the full authority of someone accustomed to protecting what mattered to him. Dr. Webb, I think this conversation is over. Mr. Blackwood, you may not fully understand the educational implications of— I understand perfectly, Richard interrupted. You want to remove a 7-year-old child from a loving family environment to place her in your research facility. That's not going to happen. Dr. Webb looked around the room, realizing that his carefully planned approach had been effectively countered by both the family's protective instincts and Emma's own understanding of the situation. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. Emma's gifts are extraordinary and they deserve extraordinary support. Emma's gifts are being nurtured by people who love her, Victoria replied firmly. That seems like the best possible support. After Dr. Webb left, the room remained quiet for several moments. Finally, Emma looked up at the adults who had rallied to protect her. Thank you, she said simply. All of you. Maria knelt down and pulled her daughter close. Emma, how did you know what to say to him? Emma looked thoughtful. Dr. Hartwell prepared me. She said that sometimes people might approach us who seemed helpful, but actually wanted to use my abilities in ways that wouldn't be good for me. She taught me to ask questions and to trust the people who care about me as a person, not just as someone who's smart. Dr. Hartwell smiled proudly. Emma, what you did today, standing up for yourself while remaining respectful, that showed remarkable maturity. Does this mean I can stay with my family? Emma asked quietly. Oh, sweetheart, Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. You're not going anywhere. This is your home. But as the family celebrated their successful protection of Emma, none of them realized that their conversation had been recorded by surveillance equipment that Dr. Webb had placed during his visit. And while they had successfully defeated this immediate threat, Emma's demonstration of her intellectual and emotional maturity had confirmed Dr. Webb's assessment of her exceptional value as a research subject. The confrontation was over, but Dr. Webb's interest in Emma Santos had only intensified. 8 months later, the Blackwood penthouse had become something unprecedented, a home where exceptional ability was nurtured within the context of love, family, and normal childhood experiences. Michael, now thriving academically, had earned admission to the advanced program at Blackwood Academy. Emma, still only 8 years old, was working with university professors twice a week while maintaining the relationships and experiences that kept her grounded and happy. But on this spring morning, as sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Emma was focused on something that combined her intellectual gifts with her growing understanding of the world around her. Michael, she said, looking up from the notebook where she had been working for the past hour, I want to show you something I've been thinking about. Michael set aside his calculus homework and moved to look over her shoulder. On the pages was what appeared to be a detailed plan, complete with organizational charts, implementation steps, and carefully thought-out logistics. What is this? He asked. It's my idea for helping other kids like us, Emma said matter-of-factly. I've been thinking about this since Dr. Webb tried to take me away. Michael studied the pages more carefully. The plan was sophisticated in its thinking, but presented in language and concepts appropriate to Emma's age and experience. Emma, this is really well thought out, but how would something like this actually work? Emma's eyes lit up with excitement. Look, there are probably lots of kids like me who are hiding their abilities because they're scared. And there are probably kids like you who have resources but still struggle because no one understands how they learn best. She pointed to a diagram she'd drawn. What if families who had resources could partner with families who had really smart kids but not many opportunities? Everyone would benefit. The kids would get appropriate education, the families would help each other, and nobody would have to be separated or treated like experiments. Like our families did, Michael said, beginning to understand the scope of her thinking. Exactly like our families, but we could help lots of families do the same thing. Emma turned to another page. I've been learning about how your dad built his business by solving problems that other people couldn't solve. Well, education for exceptional kids is broken. Maybe we could help fix it. Michael was quiet for a moment, impressed by both the ambition and the thoughtfulness of Emma's plan. How did you learn enough about business to think through something like this? Your dad has been teaching me, Emma said simply. When I asked him how he built Blackwood Technologies, he explained about identifying problems and creating solutions that work better than what existed before. So I started thinking about the problems we faced and how to solve them for other families. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Richard, Victoria, Maria, and Dr. Hartwell, who had requested a family meeting to discuss Emma's continued educational development. "Good morning, you two," Richard said, settling into his chair. "How are the studies going?" "Actually," Emma said, "I wanted to talk to everyone about something I've been working on." She explained her concept clearly and enthusiastically, walking the adults through her thinking and her proposals. As she spoke, detailing the problems she had identified and the solutions she envisioned, the adults exchanged glances of growing amazement and pride. "This is remarkable thinking, Emma," Dr. Hartwell said when Emma finished. "You've identified systemic issues that education policy experts struggle with, and you've proposed solutions that address root causes. The question is," Richard said gently, "whether you're ready to take on a project of this scope. What you're describing would take years to develop and would require significant coordination and resources." Emma looked around the room at the faces of the people who had become her extended family. "I know I'm only 8, and I know this is a big idea, but I also know that I want to use my abilities to help other kids and families. If I wait until I'm older, how many kids will miss opportunities in the meantime?" Victoria smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "Emma, sweetheart, you have whatever support you need to pursue this dream." "What would be the first step?" Maria asked, pride and amazement evident in her voice. "Learning more," Emma said simply. "I need to understand how foundations work, how to research other families' needs, and how to create programs that really help people. But I want to start now, even if I'm just learning and planning." Dr. Hartwell leaned forward. "Emma, there are several universities that have programs studying educational innovation. What if we arranged for you to work with researchers who are addressing similar questions?" "Could I do that while still living here with my family?" Emma asked. "Absolutely," Richard said firmly. "Any educational opportunities will be designed around keeping our family together." Emma smiled, an expression that combined the joy of childhood with the satisfaction of someone who had found their purpose. "Then yes, I'd like to learn everything I can about helping other exceptional kids and their families." As the family began discussing the details of Emma's expanding educational opportunities, they reflected on how much their lives had changed since that first day when a failing student and a hiding genius had discovered that their differences could become their greatest strengths. Dr. Hartwell watched the interaction with professional satisfaction and personal joy. In her 20 years of working with exceptional children, she had rarely seen a situation where intellectual gifts were nurtured so successfully within the context of emotional security and family love. "You know," she said to the group, "what you've created here is exactly what Emma's foundation concept describes, a partnership between families that benefits everyone involved and keeps children connected to the people who love them." Emma looked thoughtful. "So we're already proving that the idea works?" "You're not just proving it works," Michael said with a grin. "You're demonstrating that it can be extraordinary." Years later, when Emma Santos Blackwood would stand before education policymakers to present her research on innovative approaches to gifted education, she would remember this moment as the beginning of her understanding that the most valuable gifts anyone can possess are the courage to be authentic and the commitment to use their abilities in service of others. But that was still years away. For now, Emma was simply an 8-year-old girl who had found her family, discovered her purpose, and learned that being exceptional wasn't about being different from others. It was about using your differences to make a positive difference in the world. The future was filled with possibility, and for the first time in her life, Emma Santos wasn't afraid of what it might hold.